check.
Testing, testing.
Perfect. So when I sit next to you, we'll still have good microphone.
Okay.
So now we can just bullshit. How are you and the family doing?
Everything's great, man. I
think
have
it's cool you got
nothing
your
to
son
complain
working here.
about.
He's going through
Both
law
of my
school?
sons are working here.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
How old is that one?
He is just turned 20. He's going to be turning 21 in September.
Okay. And the other one?
They both, I have twins, and so one of them
Oh.
doesn't work here. They both turned 22 in May.
Sick.
I know.
Yeah, my oldest boy, he's serving with 10th Mountain in New York, and I got another one serving with 25th ID out of Hawaii.
What do you mean 10th Mountain? Like
He's in
Army?
Infantry, Army.
Oh,
yeah.
awesome. I don't
I
speak
forget
the
you're a
Army.
Marine,
I don't
you know,
speak the
so-
Army language. I don't know. I've heard of the Army before.
Yeah, I know those guys.
Heard of those. Yeah.
They're the ones that you taxi around all the time. Take us places.
It's the Navy that taxis the Marine Corps.
You
as
know,
I
it's hard to
understand.
keep straight. You guys all ride around.
It just
boats.
look. You could just expand the Marine Corps and keep the Marine Corps and get rid of everything else, and we'd probably be fine.
Yeah, for whale hunting maybe. I don't know. On the land. We're the
Would be
only-
nice if we never needed any of that stuff, huh?
Right? Someday. So yeah, man, it's been kind of a wild ride here lately with everything going on in the news. I mean, I was really surprised with COVID-19, and then we saw stuff going on in the news, obviously, with George Floyd, and I immediately stayed away from it. But everybody that's watched it, including law enforcement, all my law enforcement friends are real quick to comment. Because obviously that particular technique and what it's used for was not being used properly, period, and was excessive because he was already cuffed. They already had several people holding him down, and scary situation. The question that comes up, of course, with students is they're like, Dave, what can we do? Because here we have an officer who we know is committing a crime, because police officers, they've got rules of engagement just like civilians. You only use the right amount of force necessary to stop the crime. So once they've got handcuffs on them, they've got them in custody. They could theoretically keep them secure on the ground, but they don't necessarily have to use that type of force to keep that going. And here's where I would have said that you could use physical force, because he's using physical force to stop that from happening. And I would probably push that officer off and make sure my hands are shown, be like, hey, dude, he's had enough, we're good, let's let him get some air, let's let him breathe, I'll help you keep him in custody. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is a very interesting question, of course. You can imagine how this actually plays out, right? I mean, your scenario, the way it actually plays out is you're witnessing this. He says, I can't breathe. I mean, I guess we should probably start by stating the obvious here, that we both saw the video.
Yep.
This thing looks pretty clear to me as a hugely excessive force case. I don't know that it looks like first-degree murder, because lawyers are going to tell you, as I will, that there's this aspect of premeditation.
Intent.
Yes, he may have developed the intent to kill. The question is, when did he? Mm-hmm. And that we don't know, because we don't know what's going on in his head. But he was charged with serious crimes. I'm glad he was charged with serious crimes. He should be charged with serious crimes. Any officer who acts this way should be charged exactly the same way. They shouldn't have been delayed. He should have, really what should have happened is he should have been arrested right there at the scene by the other police officers, put in cuffs, thrown in the back of the police car and taken to jail in his police uniform and everything. That's what I would have liked to have seen, because they need probable cause that a crime was committed. I think you just saw that in front of you. So I think we should say that to be clear. I'd like to see the day when we saw fellow police officers say, you know what, you just killed a guy, put your hands behind your back, I'm taking you to jail. I think it's important also to say we live in a civilized society. We expect, or at least I expect, a scrupulously fair trial for the officer who's charged with second-degree murder. Nobody's talking about that, but as a defense lawyer, I expect that we will have as fair-minded and open-minded jurors as we could possibly get. They're going to say, yes, we've seen the video, yes, we've heard of it. The question will be then asked, can you put all of that aside? Everything you believe, all your conclusions, come in here, start from scratch, and listen to everything with an open mind. And if the defendant testifies, you will assess his credibility on everything he says. I expect that we'll have a fair judge, we'll have a fair trial, the rules of evidence will apply. There'll be one or two good, aggressive defense lawyers defending this guy. And then if he gets convicted, he should be dealt with appropriately. If he gets acquitted, then he's acquitted. He's not guilty and he walks. So I expect that as well. Same thing I expect for the officers who were charged, the peripheral officers who were also charged. That to me is also an interesting question to discuss, but I'll press pause on that discussion for the moment so we can get to your question. But so the way I think it actually plays out, okay, is you and I are standing around.
Yep, we're both watching.
And we see the George Floyd thing.
Yep.
And the guy says, "I can't breathe."
Yep.
I've been in that situation before, actually. I've been the "I can't breathe" guy on the bottom of the pile while the officer was yelling, "Stop resisting," and I was yelling with the air I had left, "I'm not resisting."
Yeah.
And then I got "Stop resisting" back. I can remember using my very last breath of air to just squeak out an "I can't breathe." Fortunately, I was cuffed and stuffed rather than murdered at that point. So I have a lot of sympathy for somebody in that position. I would have, in a perfect situation, I like to say I would have, right? I would have liked to have gone to the police officer and said, "Hey, he's killing that guy. You need to do something."
Yeah.
If he doesn't do anything, I would probably call 911. "There's an officer here killing blah, blah, blah. You need to send somebody." Imagine.
Well, and the public's reaction, and so I really want to be able to look at this through both lenses. How it appears to civilians, but also what law enforcement sees. Because
Totally.
For civilians, they're not used to seeing that tactic used a lot. Law enforcement may employ that tactic a lot. And so him and his buddies see it being used, and then you also have the distortion of time and space. You might think you've only been standing there for a few seconds, and it's actually been going on for several minutes, which clearly the video shows. So it happens a lot that civilians are approaching law enforcement saying, "Hey, you guys are being too much, you're being too aggressive."
And they say, "Step back."
And you start to not listen because you're doing this all the time and everybody's always accusing you. You start to become desensitized to what the public is saying. Once again, the public doesn't really understand because they haven't been on that side of the fence and they don't understand law enforcement tactics.
This is what trials are for.
And
right?
It's very rare for this type of thing to happen, but it can happen, and it does need to get dealt with. And I don't think anybody's more upset than the good law enforcement officers who now are suffering the repercussions of one man's actions.
No doubt. No, I mean, I would say among the people most upset about this are the good police officers who now are being lumped in with this huge problem we have called overgeneralization, right? When the statement starts with "all police officers," or "all this," or "all that," reasonable people of the world, when they hear that kind of a statement starting that way, we ought to step back and say, "Hold on a second." Almost every statement that starts with "all members of a group" is going to be a bad statement. But the way this actually plays out, right, is you and I pipe out and we say, "Hey, this is happening, that's happening, please stop," and say they don't. So then what actually happens in the real world is we go up and we gently push off that police officer, and George Floyd lives. And we get charged with aggravated assault.
Well, we're likely to get tackled.
Beat up, then taken to jail.
We're going to get handcuffed, taken into custody. We're going to be charged with assaulting a police officer. And then we're going to go to jail. They're going to fingerprint us, photograph us.
And George Floyd's going to live, and so we're going to look like the allegation is we had it all under control.
Those same video cameras that were there trying to help with George Floyd are now going to show us assaulting the police officers. Now we have the video evidence. And that's what's going across the news media. So we might start getting painted as, a criminal assaults a police officer, news tonight at 9. And George Floyd isn't even mentioned. The fact that he was in custody on the ground, someone standing on his neck, wasn't even mentioned.
So that's our situation.
So now we're relying on those same citizens to come forward with that cell phone footage, complete from start to finish, to show the entire situation.
But it shows us interfering with an arrest.
Correct.
That's what it shows.
Interfering with a law enforcement officer.
So what are we going to say? Here's what we're going to say. We're going to say, look, there's a section in Arizona law that's really important that deals with this. It's called mistake of fact, right? We're going to say, look, we were operating under certain facts. You say they were mistaken. Maybe they were. Maybe they weren't. We know now, in hindsight, that this guy's life needed to be saved. We know that now. But we wouldn't have that information under our scenario. So we're going to say what we believed in our head was this police officer was assaulting this person who was in cuffs and he was on the ground. And that's why we did what we did. And if the jury accepts that position, then we get exonerated. They come back not guilty because we believed facts.
Which would be even easier to prove now.
I think so. I hope so.
Than it would have been prior to this.
I hope so, because the other thing is, it'd be great if we could talk about jury nullification. We need to talk about jury nullification. It's an important. The founding fathers of our country thought this was a very important thing. So what I want to argue to represent guys like us, right now I'm in both positions, but I want to say, look, these guys believed that that there was an assault going on. They were actually going to kill George Floyd, and they acted appropriately if those facts were true. Therefore, you should let them off. But I want to further go and say, even if you don't think that's true, you should still let these guys off. Because
of their intention.
Yes, because
they meant well.
Even in a state that doesn't have a mistake of fact, let's say, we should be able to get in front of the jury. And again, to be clear, we cannot do this now. Yeah. I should be able to say, look, the government has proven every element of this crime beyond a reasonable doubt. No question. They intended to push this guy off. They pushed him off. They knew it. Everything else.
And like you always say with every other case, is if you change any nugget of that information, in other words, if they're still trying to get George Floyd in custody, get handcuffs on, that's a different situation.
Yep.
Because he is resisting arrest at that point.
Totally.
If, if we used a greater force tool, instead of just pushing him,
yep.
we ran up there and used a greater force instrument, then we just nullified it again.
Or if we kept hitting the cop after he was off the guy.
Very good, yeah.
These are all different scenarios that change everything dramatically. But imagine we just use the least amount we use our pinky finger and we push the guy off, and now we say, hey, that's all we want to do, save the guy's life. I think we're going to be okay under mistake of fact.
Okay.
Even if we're not, if you could imagine a world where we could argue jury nullification, and this is a good example, where we would just say, look, even if they've proven every element of the crime, you can still judge the law as applied to this situation and still let these guys off. We can't argue that now. I think there are many situations I'd like to argue that in, but that's just simply not available. I think the big point here is we need to get back to civility, okay? And, I'm seeing and hearing calls now to restructure the police force and this and that, and the justice system is institutionally racist and all of these other issues. Look, there's no question there are racist people on the planet. We have idiots everywhere in every walk of life. Of course, we have people who are racist and who think less of other people because of the color of their skin. This is foolishness. We need to identify foolishness every time we see foolishness.
Right.
But the calls here to fix the things that they think are wrong, in my opinion, are the wrong calls.
Not just that, but the avenue that they want to do. So they're talking about defunding the police. Well, I think the biggest problem we have with some of the agencies is that they're so defunded and so undermanned right now that they're not getting proper training that they need. They're becoming too reliant on certain things. They haven't really worked with certain skills enough to get better at it, and had enough of these situations thrown at them where they can handle it better.
I think it's fair to say, and I say this as a defense attorney who's been dealing with cops for 26 years, in my opinion, most of them are pretty good. Yep. Most of them are fine. There are problems. There's even in the Marine Corps, we used to say, okay, 10% you're going to have a problem with. Guys that even get all the way through boot camp, you're still going to have 10%.
Yep.
So we should expect that. Is it more than 10%? It could be. I don't know the exact figures. There are racist people everywhere in the world. But if you really want to get to what the problems are here, in my opinion, the problems here, we're seeing symptoms that are resulting from the fact that we have been moving through time here with the laws that are wrong. Okay? I want you to think about a good police officer who's really trying to enforce the law in the best way possible. If the law is screwed up, like let me give you an example of a screwed up law. You're peacefully smoking a joint in your backyard.
Yeah.
A cop smells that joint. And now he barges in, comes into the backyard, throws you in cuffs, and takes you away. Is he a good cop or is he a bad cop? Well, the argument that he's a good cop is, look, he's just following the law. He doesn't make the law. He's just executing the law, and he did it all professionally. Excuse me, sir, I see you're smoking a joint. Put your hands behind your back. He doesn't use excessive force, and he takes you away. He's a good cop, in the argument goes that he's just simply enforcing the law, and he did it professionally. He's a bad cop because the law he's enforcing is a screwed up law.
Right.
It initiates force against peaceful people.
And we see that a lot, though. There are sheriffs that have announced, hey, you you go ahead and pass that law, we're not going to enforce it. You know, with magazine bans or limitations on quantity of ammo and things like that. You've had an entire state say, we can't enforce that.
We have examples.
It's not enforceable.
We have examples in history of people wearing badges, enforcing bad laws, and then saying, "Hey, I can't be held accountable. All I was doing was enforcing the law."
Yeah.
And we have said in response, "Sorry, if the law's screwed up, we don't care that you were following it. You're still responsible to not follow." So there's some friction there.
Yeah.
What we need to do to fix this problem is to end the drug war. And I say this, and it's people might say, well, how is the drug war connected to the George Floyd thing? Let me tell you how it is. If you read the cases, what you will find is in the name of the drug war, we have decimated our Fourth Amendment. Said another way, what the court decides is reasonable. What's become reasonable to search and seize people in the name of getting the green leafy substance has become such a low standard that people feel messed with now. When the cop can pull you over at any time for any reason, make everybody cough up ID, get everybody out of the car, detain everybody, search everybody over a BS traffic stop, people get upset. When the cops smash the front doors down and come in with AR-15s and flashbang grenades and put grandma on her face and the kids on their face because they got a warrant to do that because they heard someone inside is selling the green leafy substance, people get upset. And so we're having this clash now between, we have for decades now, the clash, the ever-increasing violence because our laws are wrong. And people are rightly feeling backlash now that we're against this sort of heavy-handed police tactics. Because the cops are saying, look, the drug dealers are more and more armed now, and they are, because they're selling a product that people want. There's a demand for the green leafy substance and many other substances. So we've put it all in the black market. We've created a way for people in the black market to make lots of money. There's no way to enforce contracts. You can't go to court.
Just so folks understand, too, that this has all been tried before with liquor.
Prohibition, yes.
Okay.
Excellent point.
That failed miserably, quickly. They had to undo it. The government found a way to tax it and make it, and that put a lot of criminals out of business. And we don't talk about that.
And it's important to note that during that period of prohibition, the war on alcohol, we had the same types of problems with violence. Alcoholism went up. We had all kinds of problems. We need to end the drug war.
That's where a lot of bad laws were passed about who can own a machine gun, who can own a suppressor, who can own a shot-off shotgun, things like that.
We need to make it harder for police officers to mess with people. And when I say mess with people, I mean enforce, like for example, we had a case that's the Wren case. It came up through the Ninth, I don't know if it came up through the Ninth Circuit, it may have, and it got to the U.S. Supreme Court. At the time, there was a split in the country, and the question was, is it a good traffic stop simply because the officer could have pulled the person over for this particular violation? Or should the rule be, yes, he could have pulled him over for this dinky little traffic violation, but would a reasonable police officer have pulled this person over for this dinky little traffic violation? If the answer is no, well, then it's a bad stop. That position lost out. And what we got at the Supreme Court is we don't care what the officer was thinking, for the most part. If the officer had a reason, if he could have pulled you over, oh, your tires are a little low, there's a little chip in your windshield, one of your taillights was out, we're in this whole parade of abuses now. You can be detained, you can be taken out of your car, everybody else can be detained, you can be searched for weapons, we could take weapons if we know about them, and people get upset about this stuff because it violates common decency. In my opinion, it violates this sort of contract between the government acting as your agent to look for people violating your rights to now the government acting as your mommy or daddy. And people get upset. And so when we've made it so easy to get warrants and so easy to smash doors and so easy to do these things, and the violence in society has gone up and up and up and up, we've created a powder keg of violence that is now people have had enough. We need to get back to a more civilized society, and we cannot do this until we get the laws more aligned with what I would call the principle of live and let live, what really America is about. That if you're peaceful and you're not bothering anybody and you're a competent adult, you should be left alone to do whatever you want with your body, your money, your time, your property. And the law doesn't mess with you unless and until you're violating that basic rule.
Mm-hmm.
If we could get back to that, which is to me really what America is supposed to be about. We need to get back to a free society. Then, and only then, can we get the violence down, because we have now legalized violence. We need to make all initiations of violence illegal, whether the government is initiating the violence, whether the individual is initiating the. We should just take a position. It's wrong to be an aggressor, period. And that way we can get the law realigned. And then on police officers, let me just give you a quick fix here. There's absolutely no reason we can't privatize the police. And let's get the cities to say, you know, let's look at the different companies that provide police services. One company may say, you know, we got very highly trained officers. Here's our record that we don't commit violence against citizens. Another company might say, oh, our guys have master's degrees and they're well trained in use of force, and we'll select one. And then we'll see how they do. And if they do a crappy job, then we will fire the entire force and we'll hire a different force with a different philosophy. Let's get some professional providers of police service. Look, we've already done this in cases of emergency services. We have Rural Metro. They're a private, for-profit company, and they've been providing ambulance services and fire services. There's no reason to believe we can't do this with police services. Then, now what we're doing here is we're injecting market forces into the job of being a police officer. And as we know, when you get market competition, you're going to get a better service. When you remove market competition, which means you have the government be the sole monopoly, the sole provider of the service, we're stuck.
Yeah.
Right? We're stuck. We're stuck with the same old department. That's what they really want to do in Minneapolis, right? And I think that's where this happened in Minnesota. Yeah. That's really what they want to do, is say, we don't like the department anymore. Let them get rid of the department and hire another department. And then the departments that do a good job at providing police services, what's going to happen? We're going to say, wow, we want to hire that department here in Chandler too, because look at the great job they did over there. I mean, that's how we'll increase this. We need better trained police officers. We need people who understand more. We don't need people who are basically what does the government do a good job at running? They do a crappy job at running everything. Why would we want to delegate to the government the job of picking police officers? We got what we should have expected we would get. I think this is an easy solution. We need to think differently. We need to be more civilized. We need to think about this more as a police brutality problem. And until we start thinking differently about these problems, we're going to be plagued by recurring and recurring and recurring, as we have. Every time something like this happens, every time there's a march, because the calls to fix it aren't making the right calls, they're not demanding the right things, we're not getting the right fixes.
Now, there's a few states that are talking about they're going to stop all the no-knock invasions and stuff on houses.
And why did we get these no-knock warrants in the first place?
Well,
from the drug war,
it depends
exactly what I'm talking about.
Have you had a lot of that issue come up here in the state of Arizona?
Yes, it comes up every time the police get a warrant to invade somebody's home, and it's because of drugs. That's the argument. These are drug dealers. Drug dealers are known to carry guns because it's in the black market, right? Contracts can't be enforced. Collection deals can't be taken to court. That we believe there's a good chance that there is violence here, as well as, oh my God, they could flush it down the toilet. The evidence could be lost. Therefore, if we give them a few seconds, that's the reason. That's the argument. We need to get rid of the drug war. We need to get rid of the no-knock warrants. We need to get rid of making it so easy for police officers to mess with people.
Because I know law enforcement guys, and I know that they've done no-knock warrants. I also know all the evidence that they've gathered. Now, I've heard stories in other states where they did a no-knock warrant on the wrong house. The home defender, I mean, I side with him and say, man, I would have done the same thing. If I have a team of dudes that are breaking into my house and they're not announcing anything, I have no way of knowing who they are, I would return fire. And that one particular incident just kind of shocked me because I was like, dude, what would I do in that situation? You know, I would assume that someone breaking into my house in the middle of the night, you know, with guns and body armor and all this sort of stuff, was someone who like was coming for what I own. You know, coming for me, coming for my family. This is, you know, what is this? Is this the cartel or something?
Well, this is why we have the mistake of fact defense.
Man, I would
right?
lose my stuff.
This is why it's important. And if you really think about it, a crime really should come in two parts, and most of them do. What did you do, and what were you thinking when you did what you did? The actus reus and the mens rea. That's why we're trying to punish you in the criminal sense, not because just what you did, because you were thinking the wrong thing in your head. What if you were thinking the right thing in your head? What if you were thinking, I thought these were bad guys who were trying to break in, I was just, okay, then even if something horrible happened, it really shouldn't be a crime.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the proper mens rea. Now, the trend today is to make more strict liability crimes, which means there is no mens rea. If you did it, you're guilty. DUI is such a crime.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. You might have said, look, I took a breathalyzer before I left the bar. They had a police officer there. He gave me the test. He said I passed. Everybody thought I was good to drive. I had every reason to think I was good. But as it turns out, I was impaired to the slightest degree, whatever the heck that means.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty. You're guilty. We don't care what you were thinking. We don't care about all the hoops you jumped through to try to be reasonably safe. So I worry about strict liability crimes. Many of these orders that these governor dictators are imposing on us as a result of their power grabs because of the coronavirus stuff, some of these violations are strict liability violations, or at least as alleged that way. So we need to stop over-criminalizing everything. And the reason we do this is because we don't do a good job. We blur the lines between a moral issue and a legal issue, where we're always trying to take our morality, which might be right, by the way, I may even agree with you, and stick it into the law so we can enforce our moral views on everybody. We need to stop doing this, because when we do this, this creates an endless arm wrestle between people who have different moral views.
Yeah.
Why don't we just say, look, moral positions, those are in the moral world. These are the types of things where, yes, we want a virtuous society, but you can't legislate a virtuous society. You have to earn that. You have to talk to your neighbor and convince people to be virtuous. Charity can't be a forced thing. Charity has to be a voluntary thing, or it's not charity. In the legal world, that's when you violate the major concept of our society, which is live and let live. If you want a free society, you have to proceed from a live and let live attitude. So when you violate that, when you're an aggressor, said another way, you initiate force or fraud or coercion, or you do something that creates an imminent risk of such thing, okay, that's when the law should step in and say, sorry, Dave, you're violating the rule. We're not going to let you violate the rule. But if you have moral positions about things like, say, prostitution, I mean, it's perfectly consistent to say, I think being a prostitute is an immoral thing. I would discourage people from being prostitutes or for hiring prostitutes. It's a bad thing in our society. But also recognize that if you're dealing with competent adults, I mean, of course, kids is a different thing. Yep. But if you're dealing with competent adults, and of course, it has to be voluntary. If there's a pimp, a person who's got a gun who's forcing, well, that's a different question. But if you have a voluntary transaction between consenting adults, while you might say, and lots of people do, that this is an immoral deal, you should also say, but we don't want the law to sort of engulf all of our moral views and force it on other people, because there are other people in the world who have different moral views, right? There are people who have, I don't want to pick on any particular religion, but there are moral views in every religion.
So we'll grab that in a different segment, so we can just stick to the law enforcement stuff. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's some pros and cons to lots of pros to having a privatized police force.
There are.
We would see a lot of companies competing to be the soft arm, and probably a lot more people wanting to get their CCWs because the police force is a little bit more soft.
What we would get is what we wanted. We'd get what we hired, and if we didn't, we'd get rid of them, and we'd get a different product. I mean, could you think up a better system? I mean, again, it's the free market. We're injecting free market ideas into police services.
Well, it's already been proven effective.
Right.
Rather than use the post office, now you have UPS, FedEx.
How many examples do we need?
Yeah, several other companies.
What if the government was running restaurants? Do you think we'd get better restaurants?
Amazon and Walmart are demonstrating that they know how to run their business. I don't ever have to leave my house. I can have my groceries delivered, and I can shop
Yeah.
for anything I want, have it here the next day.
Why would we want something as important as police services to be run by the government? Now, the government maybe will select the provider of police services. This makes perfect sense to me as the
Sure,
representative.
they have to follow these things.
As the representative of, yeah, you would expect. I mean, if we were going to start up a private police company, what might we offer? We might say, hey, look, our guys are highly trained.
Yep.
They've had classes in use of force. They've been highly trained in that stuff. Here's our track record. We'd make the argument, right?
Yep.
And then we'd be very responsive. Did you get involved in it? We've no tolerance for that. We fired the guy immediately, you know.
Yep.
We'd be all over. Because why? Because we know we're going to be fired and we're going to lose our contract as soon as it expires.
Yeah.
And there may be even a clause.
Well,
you
then
know?
it's not necessarily like if that company is out of line and they face a lawsuit or civil liability or any of that sort of stuff, it's not my tax dollars paying for that civil liability.
And why should we be surprised that the government has thrown immunities all over the thing? You can't sue the judge. You can't sue the prosecutor. It's very hard to sue the cops.
Yeah.
There's immunities and qualified immunities all over the place. Why? They can sue you. They can sue me. Why do we put up with the fact that the government insulates itself from liability?
Yeah.
It's outrageous. So these are the things that need to be fixed.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of defunding the police or it's just saying we need to restructure the police. We need to restructure our society. If we really want a free and peaceful society, we need to start asking the right questions.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mark. Appreciate it again.
Thanks for having me, brother.
We'll do this again.
Yeah, we should.